National Student Financial Aid Scheme says it has a budget deficit of nearly 14 billion rand. As a result, it may not be able to fund all of the students who qualify for funding next year. It says that means around 100,000 students might not get money to study because of these problems. The acting CEO of NSFAS is Waseem Carrim. Waseem, good afternoon to you. This looks like a massive budget hole. How did NSFAS get into this situation?
Yeah, good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to your viewers as well. I think if we look at NSFAS, which has an organization which has had its challenges over a number of years, we almost have this perfect storm of events that are happening, right? So on one hand, you have students who are doing better at a basic education level. So year on year, we produce more bachelor passes, so more students who qualify for university. And then on the other hand, you have a cost of living crisis in South Africa, which means more households qualify or meet the NSFAS eligibility criteria for support. And you also have state resources which are declining in real terms, right? And the demand-side pressures on NSFAS are quite high in nature, and that's creating this budget deficit, which has been accumulating over a number of years. And I think we're just raising the flag to say, government collectively needs to step in and take a decision around the funding and financing of higher education in South Africa to ensure that we also don't see the year-on-year volatility at the start of each academic year.
So, wasn't all of this foreseeable? Wasn't it obvious that by next year NSFAS would get into this problem? These are, I appreciate the processes as you've explained them, but they are long-term processes, and I would imagine someone could see that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I think it takes us back to our first point. NSFAS has been an organization which has had a large degree of instability, right? It has had 9 CEOs in the last 9 years. It's been in and out of administration twice. There's boards that have been dissolved. And really, it's not good for planning. It's not good for communicating. It's not good for long-term feasibility and sustainability of an organization. And I think a big part of my work and the board's work has been on stabilization of the institution to ensure it can plan properly, it can fund properly, and it can fulfill its mandate to society and to the country. Yeah.
Okay, so, amid all of the infighting, and we remember what happened with the insourcing and the accommodation and all the rest, the people in charge at the time took their eye off the ball.
Yeah, I think you could almost go back to, of course, the decision to implement what was then termed fee-free higher education in South Africa, right? Which, as we know, was done in 2017. It was quite a rush decision. At the time, we increased VAT to be able to fund it. Over the years, NSFAS has had this problem. We've taken money from different parts of government. We've taken money from early childhood development to fund university students, and that's fine. That's a policy decision that we've taken, right? I think where we are is what we're trying to prevent is NSFAS running into a shortfall, defunding students in the middle of the year, right? And what we're saying is that we need to take decisions as a country about what the pathways of young South Africans look like through the economy. Whether that's a university education, whether that's a TVET education, whether that's short skills programs, we need to create coverage for the majority of our young people, of which university is one of the options available to them. And I think that becomes critically important if we're going to fix the student funding issue, but also the broader youth employment issue.
Sure. Waseem, I hear you on all of that. I remember the first day of the ANC's conference at Nasrec when that announcement was made. We can do what we like. I think people are desperate to get their children into the elites of society, so there'll be pressure on universities. It's a conversation for another day. I'm happy to have it. I do want to ask another question, though, is that I also understand that NSFAS is owed 45 billion rand. So that's people who received their education because of NSFAS. What should have happened is that they would have got their qualification, used their qualification to get a job while they're working, they pay NSFAS back. What is happening with that?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to NSFAS seems to have this history of taking policy decisions, not building the right mechanisms, skills, and capacity to execute on those decisions. So you have this decision that's taken to move away from loans into bursaries. And it's almost like people just forget about the loans, collections stop. The systems which underpin that, the teams which underpin that are forgotten about, and loan collections almost completely collapsed at NSFAS, right? You had another important dynamic in that the Constitutional Court ruled that garnishee orders were unconstitutional, and that also had an impact on NSFAS's collections. And a big part of my work has been, how do you rebuild the collection capacity? A big part of that is rebuilding the relationship with the South African Revenue Service, because if we can check the employability status, the asset status of these beneficiaries, then we can determine who we can collect from, and we can collect whatever we can out of that 45 billion to club and curb some of this budget deficit that we're facing.
Okay, but I mean, what happens to the 45 billion rand debt in the meantime? Does it just end up with more and more interest being placed on it, and NSFAS's bill gets higher and higher, and the situation gets worse and worse?
Yeah, I mean, you have an induplum rule, but I'm fairly confident that in the next month or so we will have a loan management strategy in place that will enable us to drive up collections and really start collecting out of that book that's going to make a dent in our finances. Yeah.
Okay, so all of that's long-term stuff. They're much bigger conversations to have. Short-term, it's the end of October. We're really 2 months away from the registration process for universities for next year, for higher education for next year. What's going to happen? 100,000 people who don't get the funding they need to? I don't need to remind you, Waseem, of the tension and frustration that will create.
So I think where we are, we're fairly confident that we have a plan in place to mitigate. I think we've created as early awareness as was possible around this issue. We have a joint task team which is working on the matter. And let me say, Stephen, that we're not going to solve this problem without some degree of reform. And I'm happy to talk about what some of that reform looks like, right? One is that there has to be a more distinct focus on funding of critical skill. Yeah, right. We cannot fund everything here. Particularly, the outcome of our education policy has to be employment and productivity. Yeah? And that's how you create a self-sustaining system. Two is that when we fund students, we have to have a reasonable expectation that they will go to university to study, and not only to study, but to pass and to graduate. Yeah. A big part of our problem is students stuck too long in the system, which is costing the state a lot of money. Another problem is that only 1 in 2 NSFAS beneficiaries will ultimately graduate. Yeah. And that is an important measure because we're not having the impact we should. We're not giving the state the return on investment it needs out of NSFAS as a fund. And lastly is to say we have to look at the suite of benefits that NSFAS offers. Yeah. And to say, where can we freeze, where can we trim, so that we enable as many students to register as possible within the budget allocation that we have.
Waseem Carrim, thanks very much indeed. Really do appreciate it. The acting CEO of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme.